If you watched it on C-SPAN yesterday, it was just a mess of questions and answers and attacks. And Bill Barr, in my opinion, was really the only one who came out looking good at the end of this entire thing. So let's dive into it. Let's start, kind of break it down into some bite-sized chunks. And one of the things I want to start with first is a transcript from Byron York. Byron York is somebody, I forget where he works. He's a big chief political correspondent for the Washington Examiner, somebody who is kind of middle of the road for most people's opinions of him. And he tweeted this yesterday after the hearing. And the reason I want to share this with you is because this is sort of indicative of how the entire hearing went. This is an actual transcript that I'm going to read through, and then we'll walk through some of the actual video clips that we saw. So, as I said, we have the House Judiciary Committee. We've got Bill Barr who comes in, and there was this pattern of question after question after question without giving Bill Barr the time to respond. And to me, it felt like it was a coordinated sort of effort. You're going to hear as we go through this show that the Democrats were repeatedly invoking the phrase, "I'm reclaiming my time. I'm reclaiming my time." They'll say, "Mr. Barr, got a question for you." He would start speaking and they would cut him off and say, "I'm reclaiming my time." And, that was something that was very coordinated in my mind. Almost every single member of the Democrats used that phrase. I've got a clip that spliced them all together. We're going to see in a minute. But before we do that, let me show you, let's walk through the transcript so you can see how little opportunity Bill Barr had to respond to the questions. Meaning it's not political. Meaning it's only political. It's not investigatory. They're not trying to pull any questions out of him. They're just using this as a political grandstanding moment, and they're not even allowing him to explain himself, which I've got a huge problem with. So let's look at the transcripts. This comes from Byron York from the Washington Examiner, and here's what it looks like. So Democratic Representative Madeleine Dean said they wanted to know whether the Justice Department was investigating the Lafayette Park incident. So if you remember, this was the incident where right in front of the White House, there were protesters. Trump and Bill Barr and the rest of the administration cleared out the protesters, and there was a lot of uproar about that because the allegation was, and I didn't look into this too much, but the idea was that they were peacefully protesting. The White House administration came out, started firing off tear gas and pepper spray to clear the area. Then, of course, you remember that President Trump and his entourage left the White House. They walked over to the church. They took some, photographs. He got a lot of flack for that, for being, all nothing more than just simple political sort of propaganda. It was a photo opportunity. And so that's what they're talking about. They're talking about this whole deal. So the Democratic Representative Madeleine Dean wants to know whether the Justice Department was investigating the Lafayette Park incident. And here is the transcript. So Bill Barr, she asks him that question. Bill Barr says, yeah, the IG is investigating it. So he presumably means the Inspector General's office. Dean says, okay, so goes through this entire paragraph right here. I guess this is the question. We'll hope that he does not get fired. Tragically, she's talking about the IG. Tragically, what happened in Lafayette Square is no longer an isolated incident. Use of chemical irritants has been used in more than 90 cities. My colleague showed you the video of the Navy vet being pepper sprayed and beaten, his bones broken. Whether or not you thought this was appropriate at the time, have you now called for law enforcement to stop using these chemical irritants on protesters? Yes or no? So we actually played that video last week, I believe it was. And you saw that Navy vet who was out there in front of Portland, and he's just standing there, really. And you have some lunatic in camouflage, camo gear with a baton just starts whacking him like 3 times, just pop, pop, pop. And he just kind of stands there like, what? Like, I didn't even do anything. And he turns around. Well, apparently, he got really badly injured because he just got whacked 3 times with a metal baton. And I think he had a broken arm or something like that, but it was not a good situation. So the question on that is appropriate. And I would love to know what the answer is and dive into that a little bit further and get a clear understanding from Mr. Barr about what the policy is. It's a good question. What are they doing? Are they going to be diving into these things? How are they distinguishing between peaceful protests and violent protests? When does a peaceful protest turn into a violent protest? When is pepper spray allowed or not allowed? Who's giving the authorization for these things? What types of non-chemical measures are being used? Are you setting up specific zones where these people can protest? Are protests being cut off at a certain time? Basically, what are the internal policies of the justice system, of the Justice Department? What are they doing? What are they saying that they're going to be doing? That's what would have been great to get out of this hearing. This is why it angers me so much that they didn't even let the man answer the question. This guy's in charge of so much, and they're not giving him the opportunity to speak because they need to make political points. And it's a lot of Democrats doing this, but the Republicans were literally just as useless. They didn't take up the mantle. They didn't push the ball forward anymore. All of their positions were sort of rambling, stream of consciousness thoughts that don't amount to anything. And I saw two representatives from Arizona who were the epitome of an embarrassing question. You're on a national stage. You have the Attorney General for the United States sitting in front of you, and you can't prepare yourself to answer a question that the rest of the country wants to know. It's embarrassing from both parties. But let's go back to the transcript. So Madeleine Dean asks the questions. Bill Barr says, yep, IG's investigating it. He responds. He says, what, pepper spray? Dean says, yes. He says, no. No? I think it's a very important non-lethal option. Dean says, for protesters? He says, no. For rioters. Sir, that was my question. For protesters? He says, no. For rioters. Yes, sir. America was founded on the principles of free speech. And Barr says, when people resist, excuse me, law enforcement, they're not peaceful. Reclaiming my time, she says. I'm surprised at your lack of respect for a member of Congress. And then at that point, Gerald Nadler says the time of the gentle lady has expired, and then goes on to another representative. So one more time, how many words? She gets this whole paragraph in. She's got a number of minutes to ask him questions. He sputters out, I don't know, what is that, 10 words, 15 words? And he starts to explain himself. He starts to talk about the difference between rioters and protesters, and she cuts him right off. It says, reclaiming my time, I'm surprised at your lack of respect for a member of Congress. Lady, you didn't even let him answer the question. We could have really spent some time on that. I would have loved to know what his answer was. Okay, so why is it a very important non-lethal option? Are there other non-important lethal options? Wouldn't you agree that the First Amendment is a pretty important right? So why are you dissuading that? How are you distinguishing between protesters, as you're calling them, and rioters? How are you defining rioters? They don't do that. She cuts them right off, says, reclaiming my time. I'm surprised at the lack of respect for Congress. Quite frankly, we're going to go through this thing. You're going to see, it gets me so heated. Bill Barr, I cannot believe that he even sat there for as long as he did. He was taking abuse after abuse after, and listen, I am no fan of Bill Barr or the Trump administration's Department of Justice. There are a lot of problems I have with both of those things. But the fact that we can't even have a simple discussion about this, when you have basically the head law enforcement officer in your congressional chambers, and you can't even formulate a coherent sentence or try to pull a point out of him. Can we do anything with this question or this answer? No, we can't. So it was a total waste of time. And this was just one question. There are many of these that we're going to get to, and I believe we have a clip. So let's jump into that, where all of these Democratic senators are asking questions and then reclaiming their time. They're not even allowing him time to answer, which means, what was the point of this whole hearing? What were you people doing in order to sort of advance the cause here of criminal justice reform?